At the beginning of the year, I had the privilege of visiting the UK, and after spending about a week in England and Wales, while out to dinner in Sheffield, I told some of the locals I was eating with about this channel and the true crime stories I cover. They would alert me to the existence of Damon Bendall, who had lived in the outer suburbs of Sheffield just about 3 years prior. They told me how on September 19th, 2021, police would receive a call from a man who identified himself as Damon Bendall. During the call, Bendall would tell the police calmly that he needed an ambulance and the police to come to his home. And when asked why, he told them that he had just murdered 4 people. When the police arrived at 7:39 a.m. that morning, only about 5 minutes after the call, they would find Bendall sitting outside of the home, injured from what would later be described as self-inflicted stab wounds to his chest and his stomach. Again, he calmly repeated,
"Yeah, well, we don't have murdered 4 people."
Unfortunately, when entering the home, they would find this to be the truth, as Bendall had killed his partner, Terry Harris, who was pregnant at the time, Terry's 2 children, John Paul Bennett and Lacey Bennett, and Lacey's friend, Connie Gent, who was staying over the house for a sleepover. Terry was 35, John was 13, and Lacey and Connie were just 11 years old. Bendall has apparently had a history of violent crimes dating all the way back to 2004, and was recently on probation after being charged with arson, although he was deemed not to be a threat to his partners and children. The probation officers would admit fault for this assessment, because around 9:42 p.m. the previous night, as the children were getting ready for bed, Bendall had reportedly attempted to contact his dealer in an effort to purchase narcotics. It is unknown what set him off, but Bendall would end up attacking Terry and all 3 children by hitting them in the head with a claw hammer. He would also assault Lacey as she was dying. The police would arrest Bendall and charge him with 4 counts of murder and the assault of Lacey. On December 21st, 2022, he would plead guilty to these charges and be sentenced to a whole life term, the UK's way of saying life without the possibility of parole. But while Bendall was caught only hours after his crime, the same cannot be said for David Fuller. Born in 1954, David Fuller enjoyed modern hobbies like photography and birdwatching, but unknown to anyone at the time, Fuller had a dark secret that would see him spending the rest of his life behind bars. These crimes would come to be known as the Bedsit murders. Growing up in the coastal town of Deal in Kent, England, Fuller developed 2 strong interests: photography and rock music. These 2 passions would collide when he was invited to accompany the rock band Cutting Crew on tour in 1985, becoming the band's unofficial photographer. You may know them for their song, "I Just Died in Your Arms." But outside of photography, Fuller worked as an electrician and was employed full-time at Kent and Sussex Hospital. Although he had been married 3 times, things seemed to be going pretty well for Fuller. That was, however, until 1987, when David Fuller would break into the homes of 25-year-old Wendy Nell and 20-year-old Caroline Pierce. He would strangle and assault the 2 women. These crimes, however, would go unsolved and remain cold for 2 decades, until a case review in 2007 confirmed that the perpetrator of each crime was the same person. Then, the case would go further unsolved for another 13 years, until 2020, when David Fuller's DNA was confirmed to be a match to that of the DNA found at the scenes. But if you think murdering 2 women is bad enough, things would only get worse when the police entered and searched Fuller's home, because once inside, police would find video and photo evidence of Fuller assaulting the corpses of over 100 women at the hospital where he worked. So in addition to 2 counts of murder, he would also be charged with over 20 crimes regarding his actions at the mortuary, as well as earning him the nickname of the Morgue Monster from one publication. In 2021, Fuller would plead guilty to these crimes and be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, while the streets are now safe from the likes of Fuller, the prison system only became more dangerous upon the detainment of Robert John Maudsley. Because although Maudsley allegedly suffered multiple forms of abuse from his parents and had heard voices telling him to end their lives, he would actually meet the majority of his victims inside prison. Let's rewind. While working as a sex worker in London in 1974, a man looking to pay Robert for his services, named John Farrell, would allegedly show him photos of children he had claimed to have assaulted. Upon hearing this information, Maudsley would strangle the man He would not try to run from these crimes, however, and later turned himself over to the police. He would be found unfit to stand trial and sent to Broadmoor Hospital. About 3 years later, with another inmate at Broadmoor, he would torture a man named David Francis, who had been convicted of assaulting a child, holding him in a cell for around 9 hours before finally taking his life. For this, he would be taken out of Broadmoor and given a life sentence at Wakefield Prison in North Yorkshire. The following year, he would kill 2 of his fellow inmates on the same day, July 29th, 1978. First, he would strangle a man that had been giving him French lessons and hide the body under his bed. He would then attempt to lure others into his cell, and when unsuccessful, began stalking the halls with a makeshift dagger. Eventually, he would corner and murder William Roberts. Allegedly, he had planned to try to claim as many as 7 lives that day, but would end up turning the knife over to the guards, letting them know the next roll call would be too short. Maudsley, later deemed too dangerous to be allowed out of solitary confinement, would be placed in a cell built specifically for him in the basement of Wakefield Prison, where he has remained since 1983. He has been given credit as being the inspiration for Hannibal Lecter, due to the unsubstantiated rumors that he had cannibalized his victims. Based on some of the reading I've done, however, I don't believe this to be true. Maudsley may have the fame of allegedly inspiring one of the most famous horror icons ever, but Lucy Letby is a name fresh in many people's minds, as she is the most prolific female serial killer of children in modern history, after she claimed 7 lives and attempted to claim 7 more, with trials and retrials spanning even to this very day. I have read over 50 pages of information about Letby, so excuse me as I try to condense it into the next couple of minutes. But if you would like a full video covering her, just let me know in the comments below. Born in 1990, Lucy Letby had always dreamed of being a nurse, a dream she would get to fulfill after being hired as a registered nurse at the neonatal unit of Countess of Chester Hospital in 2012. Things would go well for about 3 years, until the unexpected death of an otherwise healthy baby on June 8, 2015. A terrible tragedy, and unfortunately, one that occurs roughly 2 to 3 times a year at this unit. However, by the end of the year, the infant mortality rate within the unit would be over double that of the previous average, and even more the following year. The passing of these otherwise healthy infants were very sudden and unpredictable. In fact, those working in the unit could not find a single cause for the sudden rise in deaths, except for the fact that Letby was present for every single one. Allegedly, those who worked in the unit had begun to warn the higher-ups of Letby's potential involvement, and often found their concerns dismissed, and were even forced to write an apology when they tried to take matters into their own hands and remove her from the unit. The courts would refer to the children who died or nearly died under Letby's care as Child A, Child B, and so on, going all the way up to Child Q, the 17th letter of the alphabet. After 2 of 3 children born as triplets died, the police were finally involved, and after a long investigation, arrested Letby and searched her home, leading them to find 257 stolen hospital documents, some of which involving the victims, and a diary in which she wrote, "I am evil. I did this," with the initials of the infants who had died on the pages of the exact days they had passed. After her removal from the neonatal unit, which actually came prior to the arrest, the sudden rise in infant mortality at the unit had stopped. On August 21st, 2023, after a lengthy trial with thousands of pieces of evidence, Letby was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released on parole. In all, she was found guilty of 7 deaths, for a total of 14 life sentences. It was determined that she had tried to take the lives of many infants either through poisoning, injecting air, or even just blunt force trauma. Letby has claimed to be innocent throughout the entire process and has provided no motive for her crimes. Since her sentencing, investigators have begun attempting to link more suspicious deaths at other hospitals Letby had worked at. Peter Sutcliffe, like many people listed on this channel, come from what could be described as an abusive household, with his father allegedly smashing a beer bottle over Peter's head at the age of 5, as well as bringing him and his siblings to a hotel to expose their mother's infidelity. However, although his siblings would describe their father as a monster, Peter surely outdid him when he would be found guilty of murdering 13 women and injuring 7 more over the span of about 5 years. These terrible crimes were said to have begun in 1969, when his friend, Trevor Birdall, who will be important later, was with Peter when he hit a prostitute in the head with what he claimed to be a rock in a sock. She would survive, and his friend did not see the actual assault, but would basically be used as an unknowing getaway driver, as Peter jumped into his van and told him to drive, only telling him of his actions after the fact. Peter would be questioned by police thanks to the woman remembering the van's license plate number, but would avoid punishment when the woman decided not to press charges. The attack may have been fueled by an argument at a local bar after the woman allegedly tricked him out of money, but may not be the traditional start of his crime spree per se, as it predates his second known attack by nearly 6 years. But in 1975, Peter would come out in full force and attack 4 women, attacking each by striking them in the head with a hammer and cutting their bodies in various locations with a knife. Although the initial 3 victims would survive, despite needing several brain surgeries and being left with severe psychological trauma, the 4th victim, Wilma Mary McCann, would be killed on October 30th. Peter would hit her with a hammer twice and stab her 15 times. She was a mother of 4 and Peter's first confirmed murder victim. In 1976, he would attack 2 more, killing Emily Monica Jackson and injuring Marcella Claxton, who was 4 months pregnant at the time, subsequently causing her to lose the baby. He would follow this pattern, killing and injuring 16 more, usually with his preferred method of attacking them from behind with a hammer before stabbing them. Thankfully, however, on January 2nd, 1981, Peter would be arrested after being caught with a prostitute in Sheffield due to the fact he had false number plates. Since he matched the description of the attacker, he would be questioned in regards to the crimes and ultimately confess. Police would later find weapons like a hammer and a knife hidden at the scene. This case would actually cause a lot of issues for the police, as their apparent inability to capture Peter began talks of a wider concern of incompetence due to the fact he had been questioned in regards to the crimes a total of 9 times prior to his arrest. It is now known that the police have disregarded multiple pieces of information from witnesses, including some from surviving victims and even one from Trevor Birdsall, the friend who was with Peter at the time of his first attack, who told police both through an anonymous note and in person, "I have good reason to know the man you are looking for in the Ripper case. This man has dealings with prostitutes and always had a thing about them," and provided Peter's name and address. Police would allegedly mark this tip as priority number 1, but would not act on it for over 2 months. In fact, they never acted on it, not until Peter was already arrested. However, even with a possible diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, and a claim that he had diminished responsibility due to the fact he was told to commit the crimes by God, he would be found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison. He would spend a period of time at Broadmoor Hospital, the same hospital that once held Robert Maudsley, and would be attacked and nearly blinded on several occasions by other inmates. On November 13th, 2020, Peter died of a combination of complications from COVID-19 and complications from diabetes at the age of 74. Well, that's about it. Please consider liking the video to help the algorithm and subscribe to see more content like it. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out this one, where I talk about 5 YouTubers who committed horrible crimes. I'll see you next time.